Hey everybody, it's Natasha here from Soul Mission. So very exciting things are happening. Right, I'm just checking that we're live. Yes, I am live. Amazing, amazing. Right, so I wanted to share my thoughts and experiences of what's been going on lately in Afghanistan. And how this is the end of a particular cycle. So we've all seen the withdrawal of troops, Western troops from Afghanistan, and basically the Taliban retaking over the country. So it really kind of asked the question, well, what was the last 18 years about? And that's where I come to share with you what it is that awakened me, activated me as a starseed. So, for those who were born in the 70s, lived through the 80s, you will know your history. The millennials will not be aware of this, but you know, I we lived through this. The older generations lived through this and remember their history and can see what has been going on. So 9/11 happened, and the narrative at the time was that Afghanistan was to blame for the 9/11 bombings. That is very, very much up to debate because at the time Afghanistan did say, well, where's your proof? And as some of us can remember, America at the time decided to invade and bomb and take over Afghanistan. And they got around a lot of international legal laws to do this, and basically invaded a country without international legal sanction or support of any kind. And that was under the premise to target terrorism. And a whole slew of anti-terror laws came out in the world at the time, including here in the UK. And and that from that led to a war being built up or being kind of advocated for on Iraq, and the whole scenario of American generals presenting to the UN that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And I remember seeing a news headline a few years ago actually saying, well, there were never any weapons of mass destruction after they invaded Iraq. This is news, headline news. There were no weapons of mass destruction. But it's interesting how certain stories and narratives are spun in order to make make the argument to take action against the country, to invade a country and take it over. All under the premise of protecting one's own national borders and fighting terrorism. And what has been the result? Well, since Afghanistan was invaded nearly 20 years ago now, opium poppy production has risen by 900%. And so, the production of heroin has gone through the roof. And, a lot of institutions were set up to try and establish some kind of supposed democratic structure in the country. But as we've seen over the past couple of days with the Taliban coming back and taking over the country, so many people openly welcomed them back. And if we go back even further in history and we look at the history of Afghanistan, we can see that this very bizarre foreign policy was implemented in that country. Now, for those of you who read your history and have been following this, actually the Americans backed the Taliban groups in the 70s against the Russians, who were also using Afghanistan to fight their cause. So in a way, they were fighting a Cold War through other countries. So the Americans were arming the Taliban in the 70s against the Russians to avoid Afghanistan falling into communist hands. And now, 20 years later, what happened? The very same group of people that the Americans supported against the Russians, they now switch against. And this comes back to a foreign policy called switch and bait. And the way it works is it falls under this following premise. My enemy's enemy is my friend. So whoever is the enemy of my opponent, that's who I back. And yet, can you see how the switch happened in the 90s? And you could say, well, this is a completely crazy approach to take, because, if we are to believe that the Taliban are indeed crazy, psychopathic terrorist group, I don't know. I don't have enough studied knowledge on them to give an opinion either way. But to, in the first place, fund, let's say, they are a psychopathic group. Let's say to fund them in the first place, where is the integrity behind that? Where is, and you realize there is no rhyme or reason. It's simply, it's a money-making business. A lot of money was made fighting this war, fighting a lot of wars in the Middle East. And I remember the war that followed that, the Iraq war. And the whole scenario, the run-up to trying to find a legal way to invade Iraq, I found very, very activating. It made me really question what the media said, all the narrative of the media, and how that story was being played out, and also how narrow the scope of the discussion regarding this situation was in the papers at the time, and how this was being promoted. And I just remember thinking, how can they get away with this? So I became activated, and I was studying about 5 different newspapers almost every day, following this story and all the angles. And very few newspapers even discussed the whole legality of the situation. And that's when you realize that things are, discussion has been very narrowly set to what is the appropriate topic. Nobody even says, well, where's the evidence? Is it our business to be going in there? No such discussion. So that was very, very activating for me. And it opened my eyes to how the world was really running. And I didn't like it at all. And so, for a good 7 to 10 years, I became a political activist. I became a human rights activist. I participated in anti-Iraq demonstration wars. I think up until recently with the anti-lockdown protests that have been going on. The anti-Iraq war protest, 2003, I think, was the biggest protest ever in UK history. And here we are, nearly 20 years later, and what has been achieved? This whole project of trying to create a democracy from Afghanistan, which has been literally ravaged by two superpowers using its own back garden to play out their power and domination control games. It's not surprising that you've got several generations of people in that country completely traumatized and completely fed up of being used as a pawn by Western or Eastern powers. So, in some ways, I can understand why the local population, some of them might have welcomed the Taliban with open arms, because at least it's your own devil that you know. And it sounds completely irrational. But I think this is a turning point, I hope, in foreign policy, that actually trying to intervene in a country, trying to impose, our view of democracy, our way of life on another country, is quite frankly interfering with their growth as a nation. And all countries are at different levels of awakening and self realization and on a collective consciousness. And we really have to ask the question, is it our business to be interfering in this way? Beyond kind of defensive measures like keeping terrorists out of the country. I think beyond that, I think we can truly say that that policy has well and truly failed. So what are your thoughts about this? I would love to hear. Did you know about the history of Afghanistan, the fact that the Americans actually supported the Taliban in the 70s and the 80s and then switched sides? And are you aware that this is the very kind of crazy, duplicitous way of handling your foreign relations with other countries? Anyway, after all that doom and gloom, I did want to kind of end with this to say that it's interesting that this project, this American foreign policy project, has failed. And for me, it shows that this old world, this dysfunctional world, is crumbling. We can see more and more of us can see clearly that war is simply a money-making, power-grabbing business and designed to, make money selling weapons. And in this case, it seemed like it was a way to protect a very healthy crop of opium production. So I wish the people of Afghanistan all the best. I hope everybody is able to find a way to treat one another with kindness, with love, and maybe begin to heal some of the trauma that several generations have gone through over the decades, and have some peace to rebuild and move forward in their development, and encourage but not interfere. So what do you think? What's your opinion? Should we interfere? Should we not interfere? The whole world is changing. And maybe it's time we just stepped out of the way and allowed the changes to happen for the better of all. Well, that was my view on things and my kind of story of how I initially got activated. Yeah, let me know. What was it that activated you? I'm sending you so much love. Take care for now.